He didn't whisper it, he didn't soften it, he didn't even blink. My sister hid a smirk behind her wineglass. My mother fussed with the napkins like she could fold the shame out of sight. The table went quiet, waiting for me to crack. I didn't. I smiled instead because none of them knew the truth. They didn't know I'd built 2 companies from nothing. They didn't know I'd made $25 million last year. They didn't know I hadn't needed anything from them in a very long time. I pushed back my chair, smoothed my coat, and walked out of that house without a word. 3 weeks later, they walked into mine. If someone had snapped a single photo of my family that Thanksgiving, it would have looked perfect. A gleaming table, gold candles, autumn garlands draped just so. 5 people smiling like life had never once cut them, but pictures lie. My family had lived in a lie so long they forgot it wasn't real. My name is Haley Monroe. I'm 31, founder of 2 automation startups, owner of 3 properties, a woman who built a life out of grit and late-night ideas. But to my parents, I was still the daughter who never lived up to her potential, the one they described with sighs instead of sentences. My father, Thomas, ruled our home with expectations carved in stone. My mother, Evelyn, enforced them with practiced grace. Together, they built a world where everything had to look flawless, even if they had to break me to maintain the illusion. My younger sister, Lily, was the centerpiece of that illusion. Perfect posture, perfect smile, perfect life. If she tripped, they blamed the floor. If I tripped, they blamed me. I lost count of how many times I heard my mother murmur to guests, "Lily is destined for something special." Then with that small, dismissive smile, "Haley, oh, she's independent. She explores," as if my entire career was a gap year I refused to end. I didn't need their validation anymore. But children, no matter how old, remember the shape of the wounds their parents carve into them, and mine were precise. Growing up, I preferred the garage to the living room. I'd take apart radios, computers, any appliance I could get my hands on. At 12, I hacked together a basic home automation system from scrap parts. My dad unplugged it and said, "Cute hobby. Now do something real." That was when I learned I wasn't what they wanted. I just didn't realize until Thanksgiving that, to them, I wasn't anything at all. That night I sat at the far end of the table, barely in the chandelier's glow, while the conversation orbited lily-like planets around a sun. "Your boutique looks incredible, sweetheart. The expansion will be amazing. You've always had such talent," my father said. My mother only looked my way to pass the cranberry sauce. Then my father cleared his throat, leaned back, and fixed his gaze on me like he'd been rehearsing this. "So, Haley," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut the room, "still drifting around, still trying to figure out what you're doing with your life." Conversation died instantly. Lily sipped her wine. My mother rearranged a napkin like she could straighten the moment back into place. I opened my mouth, but my father wasn't finished. "Honestly, if you can't get your life together, maybe you should go live in the streets." He didn't blink, he didn't hesitate, he didn't care, and for the first time I didn't feel pain. I felt clarity, hard, cold, crystalline clarity. They had never seen me, they never planned to. I stood, smoothed my coat, and said quietly, "Thank you for dinner." Then I walked out of that carefully staged home into the cold November air. Not knowing that leaving would be the moment everything began to shift. 3 weeks later, they would walk into my world. 3 days after Thanksgiving, the silence in my penthouse felt heavier than usual. Austin's skyline stretched beneath my windows, neat, bright, alive, while I moved through the space like someone between 2 realities. In one, I was a CEO gearing up for a product launch. In the other, I was the daughter my family pretended didn't exist. I was making tea when my phone buzzed. Chloe, my cousin. The only person in the family who had ever quietly, consistently taken my side. I wiped my hands and opened her message. "Chloe, Haley, are you okay?" "Me, I'm fine. Why?" "Chloe, because your mom has been talking." My stomach tightened, not with fear but with that familiar, tired anticipation. In my family, talking meant rewriting reality. Me, what did she say now? A long pause. "Chloe, she told everyone at church your business has failed, that you're basically homeless, that you're sleeping on friends' couches until you figure yourself out." I went very still. Homeless, failed, couch hopping, they hadn't just insulted me, they debuilt a story, a tragedy vivid enough they could almost believe it themselves. I walked to the window and stared out at the penthouse I'd bought and renovated with my own money, the custom shelves, the imported marble countertops. The sweeping view of the city where I'd built my life. Homeless. A bitter laugh escaped me. "Me, I own 3 properties. Chloe, I know, but they don't want to know." That distinction hit harder than I expected. They don't want to know, not they don't know, not they misunderstood. They didn't want the truth because the truth would force them to face it. The daughter they dismissed had outpaced every expectation they'd pinned on their perfect one. Their golden child wasn't the one succeeding, their scapegoat wasn't failing, and that terrified them more than anything. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass. Me, what else did they say? Chloe, your dad said he's worried you might cling to them financially. Your mom said they've done enough and you need to grow up. Grow up. The same people who turned me into a story of incompetence were now casting themselves as victims of my imagined dependence. My chest tightened, not from hurt, but from sheer insult. One more message came through. Chloe, also Lily's boutique, it's struggling badly. Your parents said they're exploring funding options. I think they're planning something, funding options. In my family, that meant find someone to blame, someone to use, someone whose name could absorb the fallout, and that person had always been me, the daughter they belittled. The daughter they discredited, the daughter they secretly leaned on while publicly dismissing. I walked into my office and sat at my desk, fingers tapping against the wood. They threw me out and immediately turned me into a cautionary tale, humiliated me and immediately painted me as a burden, rejected me and immediately tried to recycle me, but something in me hardened. A decision formed quiet, sharp, like a blade forged in low fire. They wanted a story where I was the failure, a myth where they were the heroes, a world where I stayed small. Myths collapse. Lies unravel. 3 days after Thanksgiving, my parents rewrote my story. 3 weeks later, I would rewrite theirs. The Monday after Thanksgiving started like any other workday. Back-to-back meetings, product updates, investor calls. My life was fast, structured, alive, nothing like the stagnant version of me my parents preferred to imagine. Around noon, stepping out of a meeting, I checked my email. That was when everything shifted. A new message sat at the top of my inbox. Subject: verification required, guarantor authorization urgent, from Sinclair and Weber Law Group guarantor. Curious, I opened it. The first line knocked the air from my lungs. This notice is to confirm your status as guarantor for the $480,000 renovation loan approved in 2021. I kept reading. Attached was the signed agreement, including my signature as financial guarantor. My signature. A cold whisper slid down my spine. I downloaded the file, opened the scan, zoomed in. There it was, Haley Monroe, close but wrong. The Y curved too stiffly, the M sloped offbeat. Someone had studied my signature and tried to copy it, but they didn't understand its rhythm. They didn't have to. They just needed it to look real enough. My hands went numb. This wasn't a clerical error, not a miscommunication, not an oversight, it was forgery. By someone with access to documents bearing my authentic signature, someone close, someone certain I would never push back. My pulse hammered, betrayal tasted metallic in my mouth. My parents wouldn't, except, yes, they would. Of course they would use my name if it benefited Lily. I scrolled. Use of funds, boutique expansion. Borrower, Lily Monroe. The room tilted. The boutique they bragged about. The boutique they claimed Lily had built on raw talent. The boutique they held up as proof that she, not I, was their successful child, had been financed on my name, my credit, my reputation. Without my knowledge, without my consent. Without a single conversation. And now the loan was sliding toward default, which meant the lender would pursue me as guarantor. My assets, my businesses, my security were suddenly tied to a debt I had never agreed to. They had pulled me into a financial disaster they created, while shielding Lily from responsibility entirely. I shut my laptop before I threw it. My breathing stayed slow and controlled, not panicked, because this pattern wasn't new, it was simply the first time I could prove it. I dialed the number at the bottom of the email. A woman answered, professional and calm. I introduced myself. She confirmed the documents, the signature, the outstanding balance, the risk of default. Then she asked gently, do you believe your signature was used without your consent? Yes, I said. She exhaled, unsurprised. It happens more often than you'd think. We'll send everything you need to dispute it. But you should speak to your attorney as soon as possible. I thanked her, hung up, and called Daniel Briggs, my lawyer, who handled my acquisitions and IP filings. He picked up on the second ring. Haley, he said, you don't sound like yourself. Someone forged my signature on a $480,000 loan, I replied. Silence, heavy, sharp. Send me everything, he said. Now, within 10 minutes, we were on a video call, documents pulled up on both our screens. With each file he opened, Daniel's frown deepened. This wasn't sloppy, he said finally. This was deliberate. I know who did it, I said. He met my eyes through the camera. Then you know this won't be easy. I'm not looking for easy. He held my gaze a moment longer, weighing my resolve. Are you prepared to escalate this fully? He asked, including potential criminal charges. They've been rewriting my life for years, I said quietly. Now they've tried to write in my name, yes. I'm ready, he nodded once. Then we start tonight, and we did. While my parents were probably telling someone I was lost or struggling, I was gathering evidence, screenshots, dates, handwriting comparisons, financial trails. Every lie they'd hidden was surfacing. They thought they could use me again. They thought I was still chasing their approval. They thought forging my name would be just another secret under a glossy family photo. They had no idea who I'd become, and this time I wasn't walking away quietly. Over the next 2 days, Daniel and I unraveled the mess thread by thread. Each discovery tightened something inside me, not grief, not shock, but a cold, steady determination. By Wednesday morning, he called again. I answered immediately. Haley, he said, I've gone through everything. You need to understand this wasn't impulsive. It was coordinated. I said nothing I already knew. The loan officers believed you attended the signing in person, he continued. They were shown an ID. Someone practiced your signature. Someone rehearsed your mannerisms. This was planned. I closed my eyes, letting the truth harden not into a wound but into armor. What happens now? I asked. He hesitated. If the loan continues failing, the lender will look to the guarantor with assets and stability. If you strategically assume the debt, you can gain control of the property tied to it. The boutique building, I said. Essentially, yes. You can turn their manipulation into your leverage. I leaned back, Austin's skyline glowing behind me. My parents had spent years trying to keep me small, dependent, powerless. Their plan rested on one critical miscalculation. They still thought I needed them. What do you need from me? I asked. Your decision. Do it, I said. My voice didn't wobble. It settled low and certain. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just defending myself. We moved fast. Daniel sent formal letters disputing the signature, requesting all authentication records, and notifying the lender of possible fraud. At the same time, quietly, we positioned me to assume the debt when the inevitable default came. While my parents floated in denial, we worked in precision. Financial analysis, ownership structures, future sales scenarios, lease terms, exit paths. Every forged document became another exhibit strengthening my position. I felt calm, almost eerily so. Pain reacts, clarity plans. I was finished reacting. That night, reviewing a spreadsheet of Lily's mounting losses, I heard myself whisper, "You should have left me out of your mess." Because that was the truth. I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't chased revenge. I hadn't wanted anything from them. Not money, not attention, not redemption. All I'd wanted was distance. They built a bridge out of lies and expected me to carry them across it. Not this time. Around 11 p.m. my phone buzzed. "Haley," Daniel said, "one more thing. The lender has already flagged the loan as unstable. It's deteriorating faster than expected." "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning you could gain control sooner than we planned." "Good," I said. "The sooner this unravels, the better." He exhaled, somewhere between relief and disbelief. "Most people would be overwhelmed. You sound steady." "I've lived through worse," I replied. "They just hit it better." He didn't argue. After we hung up, I didn't pace or cry or rage. I stepped out onto my balcony and let the December air cut through the warmth of my apartment. Below, the city pulsed, lights, cars, possibility. Somewhere across town, in the house that used to be mine too, my parents were probably sleeping, certain the world still bent around them. Certain Lily would be saved, certain consequences were for other people. They didn't know the ground was already shifting. They'd spent years insisting I was the unstable one, the failure. The disappointment, but I had become the one thing they'd never expected: independent, informed, in control. If they believed humiliating me at Thanksgiving was the end of the story, they were about to learn what happens when the daughter they dismissed stops shrinking and stands. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, on a cold Friday morning, Daniel's name lit up my phone. I'd been waiting for this call, but when it came, it still felt heavier than I'd imagined. "It's official," he said. "The loan has defaulted. You now legally control the debt and everything attached to it. Everything, the boutique property, its lease, its assets, its future." 3 weeks earlier, my parents had pushed me out of their home. Today, I owned the ground beneath theirs. I sat down, letting that settle in, not as triumph, but as oxygen. "Move forward with the acquisition," I said. "No hesitation?" Daniel asked. "None." Over the next 4 days, we drafted every document we needed. Formal notice of default, assumption of debt, structured repayment terms, exit options, a rental agreement. contingencies for sale, asset transfer clauses. Nothing was vindictive, nothing was emotional, it was all legal, clean, precise. This wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries, boundaries my parents had crossed so often they'd forgotten they existed. By Tuesday night, everything was finalized. On Wednesday, Daniel filed the paperwork. By Thursday afternoon, the lender confirmed the transfer. I was the sole party in control. The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter they humiliated. The daughter they talked about like an embarrassment. The daughter they called lost now held their financial future in her hands. The universe wasn't done. Around 6:30 that evening, my phone buzzed again. Evan, Lily's boyfriend. We weren't close, but unlike my family, he'd always treated me with basic respect. Evan, I answered. What's wrong? His voice was tight. Haley, I think your parents are in trouble. They got a notice from the lender this morning. They're panicking. Of course they were. What do they think the notice means? I asked. They think the lender wants to negotiate before taking action. They think they still have time. He hesitated. They don't know it's you, I exhaled slowly. Of course they didn't. They lived in a world where consequences existed only in theory. How bad is it? I asked. Your mom's been crying. Your dad's quiet. Lily hasn't said a word all day. They are scared. Haley. I didn't feel joy, not even satisfaction, just inevitability. Listen carefully, I said. Tell them to meet me at Willow Ridge Restaurant on Friday at 7 p.m., he swallowed. They think the lender's attorney will be there. Good, I said. Let them think that. Another pause. Haley, Evan said softly, are you sure about this? 3 weeks ago, my father had told me to go live in the streets. 3 days later, my parents told people I was homeless. 2 years earlier, they'd forged my signature. I was done shrinking, done being rewritten, done functioning only as their shield. I'm not trying to destroy them, I said. I just won't let them destroy me. When the call ended, I caught my reflection in the dark window. My eyes didn't look angry or vengeful, they looked steady. For the first time in my life, everything lined up: my truth, my power, my boundaries, my voice. Friday wouldn't be about revenge, it would be about clarity. Willow Ridge was quieter than usual that Friday night, a dim, elegant restaurant tucked behind oak trees, the kind of place where secrets were spoken low and never repeated. Daniel arrived before I did, seated at the private table we'd booked for 6. Candlelight flickered in the glasses, reflecting calm where I felt calculation. A little after 7, the door opened. My mother came in first, perfect hair, perfect lipstick, a perfect expression stretched a little too tight. My father walked behind her, shoulders rigid, eyes scanning the room like he already sensed a trap. Lily hovered at the entrance, eyes glossy, like she was bracing for a truth she didn't want. No one greeted me. They sat wordlessly, the scrape of chairs the only acknowledgement of my presence. My mother cleared her throat. Haley, she said, we appreciate you arranging this meeting with the lender. We're confident this is just a misunderstanding, a bit of legal confusion. Is that so? I asked. My father leaned forward. We're prepared to discuss solutions, he said. The lender just needs to be reasonable. Daniel and I exchanged a look. They still believed everything revolved around their comfort. Daniel set a thick folder on the table and spoke evenly. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, there is no misunderstanding, he said. And I'm not the lender's attorney. My father frowned. My mother blinked. Then why are you here? My father asked. Daniel slid the folder toward them. Because Ms. Monroe, he said, nodding to me, is the acquiring party. She now controls the debt and every asset tied to it. Silence fell dense, absolute. Lily's breath hitched. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father went pale, a shade I'd never seen on him. You bought our loan, he managed. Why would you do that? I met his stare. Because you put my name on it, I said. My mother shook her head, fast, panicked. Haley, we only did it because Lily needed help, she said. We thought you'd understand. Forging my signature isn't help, I replied. Telling people I'm homeless isn't concern. Humiliating me at Thanksgiving isn't parenting. Lily slammed her palm against the table, her polished composure cracked. Why couldn't you just let it go? She snapped. You have money. You don't need this. I turned to her, really looking at her, the sister they'd protected from every consequence. You're right, I said. I don't need this, but I need my name. And you used it without asking. She opened her mouth, then closed it, swallowing whatever denial she'd been about to offer. Daniel pushed another set of papers forward. You have 2 options, he said. 1, sell the property and clear the debt entirely. 2, Ms. Monroe assumes ownership and you remain as tenants under a structured rental contract. My father stared at the documents, horrified. We have to rent our own building, he asked. It isn't your building anymore, I said. You gave that up when you signed my name. My mother's composure shattered. Tears filled her eyes, not of remorse but of fear. We're your family, she whispered. How can you do this to us? I leaned in, voice steady and cold. You taught me how, I said, the night you told me to go live in the streets. The years you pretended I was nothing, the day you forged my signature because you assumed I'd never fight back. My father swallowed, his hands trembling. What do you want from us? He asked. Nothing, I said, not forgiveness, not apologies, just accountability. Lily stared at the paperwork, eyes wide. You're ruining everything, she said. I shook my head. No, I said. I'm ending what you started. Daniel closed the folder with a soft thud. You have 7 days to decide, he said. We suggest you start immediately. No one moved, no one shouted, no one argued. The power they'd clung to for decades evaporated in a single conversation. When they finally rose to leave, they looked smaller, fragile. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. My father walked like every decision he'd ever made had suddenly gained weight. Lily paused in the doorway, voice shaking. You could have helped me, she said. I didn't soften. I did, I said. Just not the way you wanted. When the door closed behind them, I realized something. This wasn't vengeance, it was closure. It was the moment I stepped fully out of the shadow of a family that never saw me and into the life I had built myself. The 7 days that followed were quieter than I expected. No screaming calls. No tearful voicemails, no desperate attempts to twist the story, only silence. Each morning, Daniel forwarded updates. Clinical, detached. Day 2, the Monroes requested additional documents. Day 4, they consulted a financial advisor. Day 5, they tried to renegotiate with the lender and were denied. Day 6, they asked for an extension, none granted. On the 7th day, at 9:12 a.m., the message arrived. They'd chosen to sell the property. I stared at the email, letting the finality sink in. The building they'd poured their pride into gone. The boutique they'd paraded as Lily's achievement lost. The image they'd curated for decades fractured. The consequences they'd dodged for years had finally found them. Daniel called shortly after. They made the right choice, he said. The sale clears the debt completely. Your name is formally released from every tie to it. Good, I said. There was no triumph in my voice, just steadiness. Are you okay? He asked gently. I'm exactly where I need to be, I said. He didn't press. 2 weeks later, Lily's boutique shut its doors for good. She posted an announcement online, a pastel graphic with cursive text, sometimes chapters close to make room for new beginnings. No mention of the loan, no hint of the forgery. No acknowledgement of what they'd done, just another curated ending for a curated life, but the comments told a different story. What happened? Is everything okay? I heard rumors about financial issues, the facade was cracking. Meanwhile, my parents withdrew from the social scene they'd once dominated. No more church brunches, no more holiday galas. No more glossy family photos in carefully matched outfits. Instead, they moved into a smaller rental across town, not ruined, not destitute, just finally living inside the limits reality had drawn. One afternoon, Chloe texted, Chloe, they're different now, just quiet, your dad barely speaks. Your mom doesn't mention the boutique anymore. Me, are they angry? Chloe, I think they're scared. And maybe ashamed, me, ashamed of what they did. Chloe, ashamed they got caught. I closed my eyes, no apology was coming, no real ownership of the harm they'd caused. No recognition of the years they'd spent cutting me down to fit their story, and strangely, that was the moment everything clicked. They hadn't failed as parents by accident. They defailed because they believed they couldn't be wrong. I was done carrying the weight of that. One evening, as winter settled over Austin, I walked alone along the riverfront. The air was sharp. City lights scattered across the water. For the first time in a long time, my chest didn't feel tight. I felt free, not because they'd lost, not because the debt was gone. Not because their world had cracked, because I finally understood something I'd ignored for years. Healing doesn't come from punishing the people who hurt you. Healing comes from choosing yourself after they do. My family's unraveling wasn't my victory. My clarity was, they taught me to silence myself. I learned to speak. They taught me to shrink. I learned to stand. They taught me love was conditional. I learned love doesn't have to be earned. Staring at the dark water, I whispered into the cold, you tried to define me. You tried to limit me, but you never knew me. The wind carried the words away, but the truth stayed. The story they'd written about me was over. The one I was writing for myself had finally begun. Winter eased into Austin with early sunsets and cool, softened air. My life shifted into a stillness I'd never known, a quiet without the constant background noise of trying to earn approval that was never available to me in the first place. Work flourished. My teams thrived, my days filled with purpose instead of second guessing. The strangest part wasn't the success, it was the silence and the fact that it no longer hurt. Some evenings I'd stand on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching headlights stream along the highway like a river of light, and wonder if my parents ever thought about me, about what they'd said, about the signature they'd forged, about the story they'd told. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Either way, their reflection was no longer my responsibility. A month after the confrontation, Chloe texted again. "Chloe, just checking on you, heard your parents are adjusting." Me, adjusting? Chloe, yeah, your dad's working part-time at a hardware store. Your mom volunteers at the community center. They're quieter now. Softer, I think. I let that sit, not with anger or satisfaction, just contemplation. Me, are they okay? Chloe, they're surviving. But they're not the same people they were. Me, maybe that's a good thing. Chloe, for them or for you? Me, both, because growth doesn't always look like success. Sometimes it looks like illusion collapsing. They'd spent their lives crafting a picture-perfect narrative that erased anything inconvenient, losing the boutique, losing the property, downsizing. It hadn't destroyed them, it had humbled them, and humility, even late, is still a beginning, but I wasn't waiting for them to change. I wasn't holding space for a reunion I no longer needed. Forgiveness wasn't the goal, closure wasn't a door they had to open. It was one I had to walk through alone. I poured myself into what mattered. I expanded one of my startups into a training program for young women in tech, girls who reminded me of myself at 14, secretly building code, hoping someone would see their spark even if their families didn't. I started taking weekends off, really off. I visited a cabin in Colorado, a quiet lake outside Dallas, the art museum downtown I'd always meant to explore. I surrounded myself with people who valued honesty, kindness, accountability, people who didn't need me to shrink so they could feel bigger. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. One night, sitting at my desk drafting a proposal for a new AI tool, I paused and looked around my apartment, the plants I'd managed to keep alive, the local art on my walls, sticky notes scribbled with messy ideas. The realization hit quietly: this is the home I built, not the one I escaped, not the one that rejected me, the one I chose. My parents once told people I was homeless. In some ways they were right, but not in the way they thought. I had been homeless inside their expectations, homeless in a family that never made room for who I was. Homeless in a narrative where my only role was to be small. Now I had a life held up by walls I'd paid for, a door I controlled, a space where nothing about me needed to be proven. "I'm home now," I whispered. Months passed, I didn't see my parents. Maybe one day I will, maybe we'll talk, maybe we won't. Either way, I'm not waiting. Because the opposite of rejection isn't acceptance, it's freedom. Freedom to define yourself without apology. Freedom to walk away from stories written by people who never cared to learn your truth. Freedom to move forward without looking back, not from anger but from peace. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, my father told me to go live in the streets. 3 months later, I stood in a home filled with laughter, ambition, and quiet joy, the kind only built by someone who finally chooses themselves. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for permission, I was choosing peace.